Hello everyone. Uh, Welcome to the second week of CSE 271. Today we are going to review what we learned in our 174 about file and exceptions. Today we will also go through some practice example how to read a file and how to copy file as well. So without further ado, let's start. We have already learned how to take input from user or a console. How to do that? We define a scanner class and then let the scanner read a line, and then we have also defined how to read a integer, how to read a double, and all these things. We have done pretty good amount of testing as well. Now today we will also understand how we should take an input from a file. Sometimes we will store some data inside a file for to be used later on. For an example, if I write a program, okay, for a student grade book to find out the average for all the students or find out the medium of all the students and things like that. If I ask an user to input all the numbers again and again, it is too much work. So what we should do? We should store it in a file so that we can use it to be taken as the input any point of time, right? For an example, so how to read the text file? There can be different kind of files. There can be binary file, random access file, but the easiest that we use is the text file, and we will be talking about text file today and throughout the class, except if we are talking about advanced input output when we will be talking about random access files. If we don't do that, then let's stick to text file only. So it's very similar, like as if you can consider the text file as if it's a console. You can use the same scanner class to read from the text file as well. And we can use print writer, which is almost equivalent, system.out. That is a print writer that writes on the the console. Okay, so we can use the same thing, like the same methods like print, println, printf, etc. on any print writer object, and print writer will be associated with a particular output file where these things will be written as if it is written on the console. So let's move on to next slide. So the way or the syntax for defining an input file or opening a file is like this. Let's take the pen so that the way is like this. So what we do, we define a file kind of variable object, and we say new file, and inside that constructor we pass what will be the name of the file. Remember, if this program is like, let's say, being executed at a particular directory, if the input file is stored in that directory, then we can just give the file name. However, if the file is stored in another directory, okay, within the tree view of that where it is being executed, we can give the relative location. If that is not the case, then we have to give the system-wise location of that particular file. Got this point? Let's move on to the now how we define the scanner. Now scanner we can define by using calling the constructor and then passing the file object. Sometimes we just say scanner in equals to new scanner, and then we just write new file and then put the file name. That way is possible as well. So this is how to create a scanner for reading from an input file. This is the way. Now all the scanner methods that we have used earlier, like reading next line or getting the next integer, getting the next double, etc., can be achieved. Next actually just fetch the next. There are certain white characters defined, and those white characters are uh, basically blank space, uh, carriage return or new line, then tab, etc. So all these functions, they wherever the pointer is pointed, and they start reading from there and then till the next white space. So next will fetch you that string from where it is currently pointed and then till the next white space. Next line will fetch you the entire next line. Next line will fetch until the carriage return or new line is there. Has next line will return you whether the file has any more line or not. So text file, you go from the beginning to the end. You start reading from an end and then you go each line and each character and so on and so forth till you hit the end. And when you hit the end, then it will return has next line as false or has next as false. So these two functions are very good indicators to whether there is any content remaining in the file or not. Now, when we are reading file, when we are executing a code, there can be numerous amount of errors occur. For an example, let's say you entered a file name, but that file is not actually over there. How the computer programs treat this kind of erroneous situation, that is very interesting. Java assumes that when a code is being executed, there can be multiple amount of error that can occur, and they handle it in terms of exceptions. Exceptions means, let's say, as I have told you before, let's say you are trying to read from a file named file1.txt, but the file is not there. Okay, this is an error. So your code, in a normal way, if you don't declare any exceptions, what will happen? Your code will stop, your code will crash. But that is not the desired outcome when you are writing a software, right? When you are writing a software, your software should run and software should consider if this file is not there, what is the outcome that should be. But it should not crash. It should not crash the program. So how to handle that is through the means of handling the exceptions. If file not found exception happens, okay, then we have to print a message to the user. Let's say this file is not there, and then it will end the program normal way. It will not crash. For an example, when we are opening a scanner for this input file, it will throw an file not found exceptions if the file is not there. So this function is defined that way. Okay. Now, print writer will be throwing numerous amount of exceptions if it cannot write to a particular file. The easiest way to handle an error is you throw the exceptions as it occurs in the code. That way you don't have to put a try-catch block or anything. But the problem is, if you do this, whenever there is an exception, then it will come out of the main function and your program will stop executing over there. This is not a good way. So we should learn how to handle the exceptions in proper way. So we understand what an exception is. We will not go deep into the exceptions right now. Right now, let's proceed and how we should process our text file. The text file is basically you should process it in a sequential manner. It is not a random access file where you go from one point to another point randomly. You start from the beginning and you go sequentially each character and each block at a time. And then when you are reading from the text file, you use those scanner class, and then read line or read integer or read string, etc., etc. And then you proceed until you have no more or no content to read. Okay, and for the output, right, output file, you just start writing from the beginning and use the print writer to print something on the file, or like put those lines on the file, and at the end you close the file. Okay, so exceptions. So what happens, like let's say when you are reading a file, okay, if you find a point which is erroneous and you think you should not proceed anymore. For an example, if someone is trying to divide a number by 0, this is an exception, right? So what to do that? You basically throw an erroneous message and throw an exceptions, go to the or like in a hierarchy from a function, you throw these exceptions so that it can be handled in the calling function or calling method. By the way, in this course I sometimes use function, sometimes use method, and interchangeably. Basically these two means the same thing for Java. In Java, because it is object-oriented programming, we call it method, and but actually in normal programming languages such as C, we call it function. Okay, sometimes in the term of algorithms, we call it routine or subroutines. So these are all same, so I will call method and functions interchangeably. So whenever this kind of erroneous situation happen, you can throw an exceptions, and that is the correct way of dealing with error and exceptional situations in Java. Okay. So how to do that? So let's say you are writing a code for a bank, okay, and someone is trying to withdraw an amount from your bank account, but that amount is more than whatever balance is remaining in that account. So in that case, what we should do? We should say this is an exceptional situation, or this is an erroneous situation, and we should not proceed. We should not deduct this amount. We should not give this money to the user. So we should raise an exceptions. And in Java, the way to raise an exception to the higher level is to through this throw statement. So we should throw, and then what we should throw? We should throw an object, and basically we have to define a new exceptions, that is new. Then you define whatever kind of exceptions is you desire, and then the correct way is you also give a message to the user, or where the particular exceptions is handled, such that we can determine what kind of error happened. And so we should always try to put as much amount of information possible when we are raising an exceptions. That way the exception can be handled properly by at the appropriate portion of the code. Okay, exceptions is of different types. Now here I am printing a hierarchy how the exceptions class is defined. So basically there are two kind of error that can happen in a computer. One is error. For an example, let's say you are trying to read from a CD-ROM, but the CD-ROM is not functioning. That is an error. You cannot do anything. That is very rare occasion. Then there are exceptions. These are exceptions that are defined, that the programmer expect that can happen easily. Not easily, but rarely, but it can happen sometimes. So those are like kind of expected. Expected to happen sometimes. So, but those should be taken carefully. So exceptions are can be categorized into different exceptions, but broadly It is IO exceptions that happens with input output, like problem with reading from a file or writing to a file, or problem with reading from a keyboard or writing to the console, etc. etc. Then class not found exceptions. This kind of exception happens when you write a code and you you use a class and that class is not defined anywhere. So then the class not found exceptions will happen. Then there are runtime exceptions. So let's first talk about the IO exceptions. IO exceptions is you have file not found exception, then malformed URL exception. Like if you give a URL that is not formatted properly, then you will have this kind of exception. Then unknown host exception. Unknown host exception happens when you are trying to read or write to a remote computer, or you are trying to communicate with a remote computer and there is some problem or it cannot find that remote host, then your unknown host exception will happen. For an example, let's say I write a code that is trying to fetch some data from myname.org, but myname.org is not a valid domain. What will happen? Then unknown host exception will happen. Similarly, there are many runtime exceptions. For an example, arithmetic exception, which happens, as I told you, if you try to divide a number by 0, right? That is a unknown situation and that's the exceptional situation that will happen, arithmetic exception. Then class cast exception. If a number, let's say, is already floating point integer and then you are trying to convert it into a integer or something and that cannot be done. Well, from floating to integer, usually what we do, we take the integer part of the floating number, but there can be certain cases when the class cast cannot be done. Then this kind of exception can happen. Remember, all these exceptions, if it is not handled, sometimes you will see some erroneous message in Eclipse, but for these you will not. Okay. Then illegal argument exception, number format exceptions. Number format exception will happen when you are trying to convert a string and you are trying to get the double or like floating point number out of it, and this particular string doesn't contain a floating number. Then this kind of exception can happen. Okay, so then another exception is index out of bound exceptions. When you are trying to access an array and you put an index, let's say your array size is 30, but you try to fetch an element at with the index 32, then index out of bound kind of exception will happen. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. Now I kindly described how these exceptions are raised. Now how this exception should be handled. The correct way to handle an exception is through try and catch blocks. Try block, whatever you write within this try block, computer will try to execute this code. Okay, and if there is some exception happened, then it will come to the catch block that catch that particular exceptions. For an example, so we are trying to define this scanner, right? Now it may happen that there is some exception for opening that scanner. For an example, if the file is not there, right? Then what will happen? The IO exception will be raised by this function. So when this happens, it will come to this IO exceptions. Then if integer.parseInt and we are trying to convert this string into an integer, but that integer is not there, then what will happen? It will come immediately to this particular catch block and this kind of message will be printed. So always we try to distinguish between different exceptions, and then we write the code that is to be tried inside the try block, and then we put multiple catches to catch those exceptions and print appropriate message to the user so that we understand what kind of exception happened. So again, it is the same block, like when we catch exceptions, it will come here or here. Let's see, the file not found exception will be catched here, and if the scanner does not find exception, so because no such element exception is a subclass of file not found exception, it will be cached over here. But if there is number format exception, then we will catch the exceptions in this particular catch block. Okay. Here in this slide, we are going to explain again in a code how we should proceed. The same way, basically, we should write the blocks here, and here what we do is we take the input and send the string to a method, and let that method handle those exceptions themselves, and so whatever error will be caused, it will be caused here. And this process, okay, this can raise any exceptions, right? And this will be again caught in this catch blocks. Now for this place, you see we have a catch, we are catching IO exceptions here, right? And then we catch exception here. What is happening here? So whenever an exception happen in the try block, it will go from one catch statement to another catch statement. If it is IO exception kind of exception, then it will be caught in this particular catch exception catch statement, and this message will be printed. For any other exception, it will come here. Now see here, it's a very good point. This is handling all kind of exceptions. Basically, like if you go to our tree view, we will see the top is exceptions, and then we have subclasses like IO exceptions, file not found exceptions, etc. These, if any kind of exception happen, it will happen. So if this statement like catch except statement was here before this IO exceptions, then any kind of exceptions will be caught on this block, then it will never go to this IO exceptions. So we should write a code in this way that we first narrow down the exceptions, whatever we think, and then we should write a generic exception block for any kind of exceptions, so that any kind of scenario is handled. Now again, there are some checked exceptions and unchecked exceptions, as I was saying. Now we understand, we will not talk about error in this course that much, because those will not be we will not prepare for these things. We will talk about exceptions and its tree views. Now there are some checked exceptions, so like IO exceptions, class not find exceptions, and all these. These can be checked while you are compiling your code. Eclipse will show you a red line if you don't handle an exceptions that can be thrown by a function. Now these exceptions, basically what you do, it is written in the function definition. So if a function can throw any of these exceptions, like any of these exceptions, then this should be written on the function definition. And when you are calling those functions or methods, you have to put a try catch block, or you can throw that exception in the main function. So that's how it is done. However, for any runtime exceptions, those are not checked. Okay, those functions can those exceptions can happen runtime. It's a good practice to know what kind of runtime exception can happen with your code, and also take care of those exceptions as well. But oftentimes we don't do it. For an example, number format exceptions. We will talk about it in today's class. So let's proceed to exception. So So if you are writing a method or function like read data, okay, and you are trying to read from the file name, so you can put throw statement, okay, that will basically throw the exceptions whenever this exception happen inside this function, inside the function, it will throw the exceptions to the caller function. So if this read data is called from the main function, then the exception will be raised to the main function and let the main function handle it. Otherwise, we should put try catch block inside this read data function. Okay, so the throw clause is to basically throw or raise this exception to the upper section, upper level of caller function. Okay. Now we understand about the exceptions that can happen with file. Now is the time to understand how to close the file. So we talked about that if we want to read or write from a file, we have to first open a file. So we have to define a function object, then we have to open a scanner or print writer. Scanner is from reading from that file, print writer is from writing to a file. And after we are done with reading or writing to that file, we should close it. If we don't close it, there will be some problem and the data will be not be saved. So, and if we, whenever Java program opens a, let's say, input stream or something, or like scanner, and it doesn't close it properly, this resource is blocked in the operating system and it consumes memory and all this stuff. So we should always close the file no matter what. And if we have written try opening a file in the try catch block, we should put a finally statement to do that. So the correct way, like sometimes what we do is we put the try and we put a condition, the try, then printwriter.out equals this file name. If this is, then we write the data. If it is not like open, then it will not come here. It will go to the catch block. And then we write the final statement or we write the close statement over here. That way it will be closed. However, print writer and scanner, these are auto close interface. So when the program is executing, when the program stops executing, it will automatically close itself. So there are like Java or have a auto close functionality that does that. But remember, it is a good practice to always close a resource that you use. Okay. Then there is another special case we use in our code that is called assert. Sometimes we want to, raise an error and we want to point that, okay, like tester functions. We want to test if a code is right or if two files are equal and things like that. Then we can write this keyword assert, and you can go through those files and put assert. If this condition is valid, it will go to the next step. If it assert and found this is false, this condition is false, then it will raise an error, asserts an error, and it will stop the program. We sometimes do that because we want to test a code, and whenever there is an error we found, we should stop the code, like we should not go further, and we should just say, hey, there is this problem. So there is this assertion problem. So we try to validate, like assertion is kind of validating things, and the assertion error will happen if assert and then there is a false statement. Right? We will sometimes we try to do try, catch, and then finally. We try to, let's say, as I say, we do like writing data. If there is problem in the try block, then it will come to catch block. Okay, and then if whatever happens, either you are done with writing, you are not done, you got a exception, regardless of whether it went to the catch block or not, the finally statement will always be executed. So finally is something you can see, try this. If an exception occur, then go to the catch block. But whatever happened, like exception occurred or not, your finally block will always be called. So that's why we use finally. Okay. Now let's talk about how we should handle erroneous situations. So let's say we are reading from some file, and these are the numbers stored there. Now we should always think of what kind of situation, erroneous situation, that can happen during this file. For an example, your file not be there, so you have file not found exception. Who can raise that error? It will be raised by the scanner class, because when the scanner is trying to read from that file or trying to open that scanner class, it will say, oh well, that file is not there. Then when you are trying to, let's say on this line, okay, you are trying to read an integer, or on this line, let's say you are trying to read a positive number, then there will be an error that it will say, okay, this number is not a positive number. So there will be this kind of error. And it may also happen, let's say you try to read some name and then some value, but on this line those two things are not there, so no such element will exception will happen. So when you understand what kind of error there can be, then you should always try to put the try catch blocks, or like you should try to throw those things in a function definition. Okay, so this is one example how we do this. So let's say you are trying to reading from a file and there are exceptions, so you put file not found, no such element found, and then IO exception found, and then you put the appropriate message to the user that these are the cause of problem that is done. So this is how you should handle exceptions in your code. Again, as I was saying, we can put a condition for the try block, and we should, if this particular code executes without any exception, then it will go and execute whatever is written inside the try block. If that is not the case, it will not do anything, it will not come here. And if an exception happens, right, what will happen? We don't have a catch block right here, so what will happen? It's a good thing. If exceptions occur while this in this scanner constructor, then it will immediately come out of this function read file, and it will raise the IO exceptions to the upper level. Okay, so this is how we can handle reading and writing. On this particular case, what we are trying to explain is, if you want to raise an exception when there is some erroneous situation. For an example, for this particular code, what is happening is it is trying to read a particular amount of data from the input file, and if there is still data left after reading that amount of time, for an example, let's say you are trying to read 30 integer or 30 lines, right? And if after you read those 30 lines and still there are some input left in the file, and then you want to raise an exception, then you simply say throw new exception and you put the message. Okay, so basically if here I'm trying to read all those values, and then if there is still data left, then I am raising this exception. I'm pretty sure that what I taught in this particular section, it is not enough to understand exception, because you learn exception as we go through the course and we use the exception. We use try catch block, we use the several exception handling methods and all this stuff. Right now, for this today's class, what we will do, we will try to write a file copy methodology where we read from a file and write to a file. Of course, we will use text file, to better, easy of use. And through that we will learn little bit of exception handling. However, as we progress through the course, we will learn more and we will see in numerous places. For example, when we are using graphical user interface or graphics, we will see there can be tremendous amount of exceptional cases that can happen, and we should learn how to handle those exceptions. And we will learn on and at that time. So let's start our practice coding with Eclipse. So let's open a project. Again, let me explain you how we should proceed. We should first try to read from a file and then write to a output file, right? So we should read one line at a time from the input file and write that line to the output file. So let's do that. Let's open a project. So go to Eclipse, File, and then New Java project, right? So let's name it. What should you name? File copy. Okay, that is the name of the project. Let's call it Finish. And then inside file copy, oh, we have already created some earlier. I did this code, so that's why there are some code written and already our input and output files all are there. So let me delete all those so that we don't get confused. This is because this was from earlier code practice that I was doing. So let's do source new Java project. Sorry, not Java project. Let's create a Java class, new Java class, and we define the Java class as file copier. Right. File copier. So that is the Java class. Let's put some commenting. Remember, it is always useful to put some comment when you are writing a code so that people who are reading or trying to edit will be doing it easily. So it is a good practice. When I am teaching Java doc, I will explain you again, but let me try to explain a little bit. Put a forward slash followed by 2 star and then press enter in Eclipse. That will create a comment block for a class. So let's write this class copy handles files, right? So let's then create how we start executing the program. The program start executing at the main function. So write main and then control enter, and your function will be created. So first, what we have to do, we have to ask the user what is the input file name, right? And then we will ask the user what is the output file name. So let's do that. So system.out.println, and then print a message to the user. What is the source file to copy from, right? And then take the input from the user. How should we take the input? Remember that we have to define a scanner. Let's call it console input. Okay, equals new scanner system.in. Right. Now see, immediately Eclipse is telling you that there is some problem. Hover over it and it will show, okay, it cannot find the class definition. It is suggesting that you import scanner class that is defined under java.util package. So I just do that and it will import it. Then you go there, and to take the input, what you do, you will just simply say string, right, source file equals cin dot next. Earlier, when we were reading integer or double, we used to call the function c.int as next int or next double. That will read the next string and then convert it into integer or double. But here we are taking the input directly, so we will just call next. Then we will print again the message system.out.println. We will ask the user what is the destination file, right? What is the destination file to copy, right? Where we should copy? Copy to, let's see. So what will we say? Scanner string dest file equals scene dot next. Here destination file will contain whatever the destination file we need to enter. Now we need to open these open a scanner class to read the line from the input source file, and we have to also open a print writer that can write to the destination file. So let's first open scanner. We will call it in scanner equals new scanner, and we have to do new file, and then we have to provide the file name, so source file, right? Here see, Eclipse is immediately telling me I don't have the file class imported, so let's import the file. Now it is asking me I have to raise this new scanner. This constructor is raising a exception, that is file not found exception. We can either throw this exception right like this, so it will, if there is exception while opening it, it will throw from the main statement. Otherwise what will happen, this is the one way of dealing with it, but we will not do it this way. So the other way is surround it with try catch block, right? So what we can do, you can see it is surrounded by a try catch block where we try to open this, and then immediately if it fails or there is exception raised by the scanner, then it will come in the cache. So the good way to do this is you put a e.print stack trace and it will just print whatever the problem is. Maybe you can put a message also. So system.out.println, or actually you don't need to print stack trace. If you don't do print stack trace println, then you can just simply say problem opening the %s, the file name, right, or the input file, and then %s. You print a message to the user that there is some problem opening this file, right? And print, oh, println, no, it should be printf, right? And let's do, then if this is created, okay, then we should come here and write print writer out equals new print writer, and then we have to give destination file, new file, dest file, right? Now again, it is this printWriter constructor is throwing an exception, so we have to handle it. So we have to handle it with try catch block. So let's put it into comment, and we put a message system.out.printf. We may put a message if this is the we put a message that says problem in opening the output file or destination file, and you should put the name, right? And this is file name is destination file, right? Once we do that, that means now, so this particular code block will come, here. Now, here's a good thing to understand. If you cannot open this file, then what you should do? You should just go out of this code. So in this case, you can put a return statement. So if it is successful in opening the scanner, then it will go to the next block. Otherwise, it will return from this main function. Similarly, we can put a return statement here as well. Now, if both of these, opening a scanner and opening a printWriter is successful, then we should come here. What we should do? We should do while now what we should do is we should read line by line, right? So we should put a statement like while in scanner dot has next. That means if in scanner has something to read, then we'll go inside this loop. Now, why here is we having problem? Because this in scanner is created or the initial defined inside this try block. So our code is saying that we cannot use it here because what if it is not executed properly and it comes to catch block? So what we have to do, the solution is cut. We just put it outside of the try block, and then we just put in scanner. So that is the case. So now in scanner has next. Then what we should do? We should say string. We should read the line, right? String line equals in scanner dot next line. We read the next line and store it into the string. So better we print this line so that in the console, so that we can understand what is going on. So system.out.println. So the line is reading this line, and we put the line. Remember, line is a string, and this particular statement is also a string, so we can just join them using the plus operator. System.out. Now we understand that. Now what we should do? We should just print this statement, or we should just write this line to our output file. So we have our output printWriter that is defined as out. So we should say out.println, and we just pass this. Similar thing with printWriter. We have to put it outside of the declare this variable outside of this catch block. Otherwise, compilation will have some error. out.println, and what we should write, right. So this is done. What is the statement repairing? So we have to close the resources, the scanner and the print writer. So in scanner dot close and out dot close. These two statements will close those things. Now what we should do? We should say a statement, generic statement dot, just print a generic statement that done with the file, just to show that user. Let's now create a file so that we can copy from. Now, as I was saying, in Java, right, if you are trying to give only file name, then you have to create the file inside the root directory of the project. So we call it new, we create a file, new file, and let's name the file source.txt. Finish. And let's write just first line, second line, and third line. So these are the content of the source file. So let's run this code. Run. So what to copy from? So let's source.txt, just to show you where the error can be. And then where to copy to? So let's say destination.txt. Now it is immediately telling me problem opening the input file source.txt, because this file is not there, right? So let's run this program again, and where to copy from? Let's say source.txt, and where to copy? Let's call it destination.txt. And if we do that, then we see it is reading from this line. It is read first line, second line, third line. So if we see our meat of the code block is here, we can say meat of the. So where we are reading, first we are reading the line from the input file, then printing this line to the console where it is being printed here, and then we are also writing the line to the output file. Let's find the output file. Now we cannot find the output file here. Why? The reason is Eclipse doesn't show you the list of files that are new. So to show the new files, what you have to do, you right click on the project and then say refresh, and you should see what is this, newly created file. If you click on the destination, you will see the same content as in source file is in the destination file, because we write it. So this concludes our code today. Today we learned how to handle file input output, and then what are the exceptions that can be associated with it, and we also learned how to handle exception. In the next class we will talk about more on string operations and array list. Have a good day.